next up is Eric Roth of Capella Minerals, and Eric will be joining us in Frankfurt as well for the Deutsche Goldmesse. You can see it behind me at the end of May. I'm looking forward to hosting him in Frankfurt. But in the meantime, you bought a project in Norway, Eric, last week, from what I've seen, or earlier this week. It's all a blur now these days. But tell us all about it. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Kai, and thanks for having me, and a good big hello to your listeners too. So, yeah, exactly. So that was a week ago now, Kai. We announced that we had acquired a new advanced stage project here in Norway. And what I'll do is I'll just share the screen and we can go through the presentation together. So basically where we are with the project is it was a project, it's resource stage. And just to begin with, this is actually an overview, just for the high level overview for the listeners that aren't familiar with Capella. So we are focusing on copper and gold, and all of our projects are in Canada and in Scandinavia. So just so that people are clear on commodity and also geography. This is actually an overview of our Skjoldi project. Which is one of our drill-ready projects in Norway, and just also to give people a lay of the land. And also, just a couple of comments before we move on. Just a reminder that we are a TSX-listed company. We did recently get an OTCQB listing, which will make it much easier for US investors to trade the stock. And we do also have a secondary listing there in Frankfurt. And of course, look forward to seeing you in Frankfurt as well as we move forward here. So. I'll just take you through the portfolio overall, and then I will focus on this new asset that we acquired last week, which is the Hesje asset. But if I just step you very quickly through the global portfolio. So we have, in Canada, we have 2 gold joint ventures at the moment, Kai. So we have, one of them is called the Domain joint venture. That's with Yamana Gold in Manitoba. It's a relatively advanced stage project, has about 10,000 meters of drilling on it. Yamana is now pushing that through permitting again, and we are looking forward to getting some drilling happening there as well. The second project we have in Canada, of course, is Savant Lake. And Savant Lake, there was actually a press release just on Monday, Kai, where our joint venture partners, Prospector Metals, who were formerly known as Ethos Gold, put out their plan for drilling on 4 of their projects, of which one of them is the Savant Lake joint venture. And you know, there's some really good things going to happen there too. There'll be field teams back on the ground in May, and then drilling for Q4. So Q3, Q4, somewhere in that sort of window. So, and of course, the good thing about the Savant Lake joint venture is that this is, because Prospector is still on the earn-in phase for this, it's basically their expenditure. So that's something that's, you know, a big upside there for Capella shareholders as well. And in the case of both those 2 projects, we're looking for high-grade gold in iron formation. So that's the main target we're looking on both of those. But what I'll do in this talk, Kai, is focus specifically on the projects where we've had the most movement, particularly in the last week or 2, which is Norway and also the Finnish assets. As you mentioned in the introduction, and thanks for the great introduction. So Hesje is a new project that we've acquired. For people who've been following the story, we have a really good foothold in the massive sulfide, these VMS belts in Norway. So we'd originally acquired 2 projects, one called Skjoldi, the other one called Lochen. Keeping in mind that these are old mining districts that were basically active until you know, the mid-1980s, and essentially they closed down because copper prices tanked in the mid-80s, and also, of course, Norway then had a lot of oil income. So basically, the mining industry went dormant in the 80s. A similar thing happened to the third project here, which is Hesje, which actually came to us from the local community because they were so, you know, thrilled with the work we were doing at Skjoldi in terms of getting those drill targets ready. They said, you know, you guys have got to come and have a look at this. It's a project that was drilled in the 70s. 12,000 meters of drilling on it, has a non-43-1 compliant resource, but there is you know, there's substantial mineralization on this property. And it was just been sitting there. It's been sitting there since basically the early 80s, and it was just a victim of, like everything that happened in Norway in terms of just going dormant in the mid-80s. So great opportunity for us, very cheap entry point, and just a fantastic cornerstone asset for that Skjoldi district, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. But one of the key things, again, just to reiterate, these are former mining districts. They were in production for hundreds of years. They produced copper and zinc primarily. The work that we've done suggests there's also some good potential there for cobalt. And so we are looking at these projects as copper, zinc, and cobalt assets. Now, of course, in some of those old mines too, they never historically assayed for gold and silver. So going forward, we'll do that more systematically as well too. But for the moment, we are considering these as copper, zinc, and cobalt assets. And the other project that I will mention too quickly is our Finnish asset. We did acquire late last year a project from Cullen Resources, Kadajavara, Akanis. It's basically in that belt where you have all the big players and all the big new discoveries, Rupert Resources, Orion. We were very fortunate to get a really good piece of real estate at a very good entry price, and there's some good things happening there. And we've actually just completed a drone magnetic survey there, and some good things happening in terms of the targeting. Just in terms of the capital structure before I move on to the new acquisition, so just keep in mind, so market cap at the moment of the company is 14 million Canadian. I think it's a really cheap entry point considering the portfolio we have. The biggest shareholders are Frucht Express, which is a private group out of Austria. They have actually bought into Capella on market and just on the strength of the Norwegian copper assets. They've been very supportive, and they're very long-term shareholders. The other two shareholders, which probably a lot of the people would know, Sandstorm and EMX as well, have been on the share register for a while, and management as well, there with just under 10%. So 14 million market cap. In terms of cash, what we are looking for is basically looking at liquidating, in terms of topping up treasury to do the programs we're talking about. We do have marketable securities, which we can sell at any point in time that we wish. We also have a bunch of warrants that are fairly close to being in the money. So we are hoping that we can generate enough news flow here, enough enthusiasm to get those warrants into the money. And then, of course, the other option we have, non-financing, is obviously looking at, maybe we can be clever with some of the non-core assets. So all of those are sort of on the table in terms of topping up treasury. But the project that I really wanted to talk about, Kai, was this one, Hesje. This is basically where we are. We're in central Norway here. So this is in what they called the old Røros Mining District. There were two big mining districts historically in Norway. One was the Lochen district, which I'll talk about in a moment. The second one was this Røros district. We're in the northern part of that. And the interesting thing, the project that we've acquired is sitting in the southwest corner of this map. It's called Hesje. As I mentioned, it had 12,000 meters of drilling done in the 70s. And then essentially it was just left idle for the last 40 years. And so we've had a great opportunity to pick this up. Mineralization is open, some very good copper and zinc grades in this. And of course, and in our resampling, we've got some very good cobalt numbers as well too. So this is a really nice cornerstone asset for us, thinking about a district scale project here. So we have the Hesje asset here in the southwest corner of that map. We have the Skjolli project, which is what we've been talking about up until recently, in terms of having the drill targeting completed. We have permits in hand for 4,000 meters of drilling, up to 25 holes, and there's some really good targets coming out there at Skjolli as well. So the thing that's really interesting for Capella shareholders here is that this gives it a center of gravity, talking about that Skjolli district as a as a bigger project, and potentially as a collective mining center as you go forward, because there's good potential there. And the other thing too, that one thing I should also mention, there's a whole bunch of other copper prospects and occurrences in this belt that really people haven't looked at. So we are looking at this sort of consolidation model, if you like, for this part of the world. So, but as I say, from our perspective, it's nice to have an advanced stage project. This is a resource stage project, and it will be supplemented in parallel by these drill programs we have, for example, at Skjolli, Lochen, and other areas as well too. So just a few words on Hesje. So basically, just to reiterate, and effectively, we got it for a fairly good price, in the sense of there's almost, it's essentially just money in the ground until we get to the end of, once you get into production, there is an NSR on this project of 2.5%, of which we can buy back 0.5%. But essentially, it's just money in the ground until that point. If you look at Hesje, this is the lay of the land. Like Skjolli, it's above the tree line, so there's no forest in this part of the world. In the case of Hesje, the mineralization, it does outcrop on surface. It dips into the hill we see here. The importance of that topography is, and I'll show you in a section in a moment, is that it does give us good potential for access to the mineralization through an adit in that valley wall there, and I'll explain that in a moment on a section. But the project's been idle since the 1980s. The mineralization style is identical to what we're looking for in Skjolli. It's massive sulfides again, chalcopyrite, sphalerite, and pyrite pyrrhotite. And of course, the work that we've been doing suggests there's some really good cobalt concentrations here as well. And of course, very strong community support here. So as a section, so again, this is just a mention of this is what Hesje looks like when you do a slice through that hill. The mineralization basically dips to the southwest. We are looking at the potential putting in an adit here at this level here, about the 700-meter level. If you look at the last drill hole that intersected this mineralization, it was 14.5 meters at 4.3% copper, 1.3% zinc. So when you do a copper equivalent of that, that's about 4.8% copper. So these are really fantastic grades, and this thing is just sitting there. And so from our perspective, this is a really good addition to the portfolio. It's a resource stage project. What we do plan to do next, Kai, is essentially the next step for us would be to complete that 43-101 compliant mineral resource. Out of that will, of course, come some suggestions for drilling, both infill and step out. And then, of course, what we would like to do is push this quickly towards that sort of PEA type level where you can start already looking at some of these production related scenarios like metallurgy and how would you mine it and things like that. So in the short term, this is something that we think could move very, very quickly to one of those scoping level type mining studies. So we're very enthusiastic. It's great to have it in the project and in the portfolio, and it complements very nicely what we're doing in that broader Shoalhaven district. So just to remind people on Shoalhaven, which is located about 20 kilometers away, and the other thing I will mention too, Kai, is that the infrastructure here in this part of the world is fantastic. We've got basically between the Shoalhaven project and Hesje Gruve, we have a major railway line. There's paved highways. There's lots of hydroelectric power here in this area. So energy is really cheap, and that's obviously a big consideration when you're building mines. So we've got a lot of the good infrastructure here that you need to make these projects work. So that's a huge positive for these. And in the case of Shoalhaven, as I mentioned, so we do have 4 target areas that we have ready to go for drilling. So 3 of them are sitting on what we call this main prospective horizon. It's a 20-kilometer long belt where all the known massive sulfide deposits are sitting. But we have just identified with the work that we completed late last year, there is actually a target called Shoalhaven Deeps. It looks like a stacked lens. It's a brand new lens of mineralization that nobody has ever looked at. And we do know that where it daylights on surface, there is actually high-grade copper mineralization. So we're really enthusiastic about this Shoalhaven Deeps target as a drilling target. So the important thing for us is that center of gravity. Now we have Hesje Gruve in the Shoalhaven district. We've got the Shoalhaven project itself very close. And keeping in mind, these are old mining districts. So there's a lot of support locally for mining. A lot of people had, family that worked in the mines, particularly, grandfathers and things like that. So a lot of support and a lot of interest in seeing these projects move forward here. The other project, I guess, that we have also in Norway is called Lochen. So this is now closer to the coast. Now, Lochen, for the people who aren't familiar with the district, was actually the biggest massive sulfide, in fact, of its class. It is an ophiolite-hosted massive sulfide, and it's the biggest of its class known anywhere. They mined about 24 million tons at 2.3% copper, 1.9% zinc. And what we are looking at essentially, Kai, is we've been doing target generation work in the satellite bodies around it. And the key thing for us here is that last year we had basically 24 of these satellite deposits sort of on the radar here to look at. We've now narrowed it down to 5. And the idea here is that now in the summer here, we'll finalize that drill target generation work, and then probably Q3, Q4, we're looking at doing some drilling here. So, but again, some really good targets coming up here, and this is something that we're very keen to move forward as well. And just a couple of words on the Finnish asset, just to wrap up. I know we're out of time, Kai, but just to mention that we do have this 200 square kilometer piece of ground in Finland. It's on that main trend where you have Rupert Resources, Ori, and all the big discoveries of recent time we've just completed. We're really moving fast on the targeting. And interestingly, we've got some great anomalies that have come out, some of them including from previous work. In this case, there's some really good basic till numbers that came out of the Anglo-American work, over a decade ago. So some really good copper and gold targets coming out of this part of the world. So we've got lots going on in the portfolio, but I think the key sort of news for us this week was essentially the acquisition of Hesje Gruve. That really is a huge addition to the portfolio, and thinking about that district scale play around Shoalhaven there. So I think it's a great step forward for us as a company.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you running us through it, through some of the reasons why you acquired it. And, please stay on in the chat. I have a couple more follow-up questions, like budget, and how is the focus shifting a little bit? How are you diverting dollars? How much do you need to spend to get to a first economic assessment as well of the project? All those questions we'll talk in the chat, because we're out of time on the air, unfortunately. So
sounds good. Thanks, Kai. I appreciate it.
No, Eric, thanks for joining us. I'll see you in Frankfurt at the end of May. I'm looking forward to it. So
Likewise,
fantastic.
look forward to it.